Hey everybody, Minnesota Governor Tim Walz here, longtime school teacher. Excitement in the air, feels like first day of school. And as a football coach, we're back on offense. Vice President Harris is bringing the energy, making sure she's going to be there to protect the democracy and get folks fired up, making sure we're protecting reproductive rights, working for the middle class, and bringing back some joy to our politics. So get out there, feel the excitement, get engaged. Let's win this thing in November.
A couple of weeks ago, few Democrats could have identified who Governor Tim Walz of Minnesota is. They would not have been able to pick him from a group photograph of Democratic governors. Now, he is the running mate of Kamala Harris at the top of the Democratic ticket. In a matter of weeks, Tim Walz has garnered a very enthusiastic following in his party, particularly among liberals who cheer his progressive policies. He's also got a plain-spoken manner about him which has endeared him to his party folks, particularly his attacks on former President Donald Trump. This newfound love from the Democratic faithful has helped him become Vice President Kamala Harris's running mate. Here's a closer look at who Tim Walz is and what his record is in public life. So where did he get his start in politics? Tim Walz grew up in rural Nebraska. He served more than 2 decades in the Army National Guard and retired as a Command Sergeant Major. He received a social science degree from the Chadron State College in Nebraska. Walz met his wife Gwen while both of them were teachers. They have 2 children. Walz has been teaching in high school since then, social studies, until he decided to run for public office. He also has the distinction of leading his school team to the national championships. In 2006, he knocked off a Republican incumbent in Minnesota's 1st District, which is a rural area that leans heavily Republican. Walz spent 6 terms in the U.S. House of Representatives before he was elected governor in 2018. He won by more than 11 percentage points, propelled by voters in cities and in the Minneapolis suburbs. He ran again and won again in 2022. So what are his top issues? The political landscape has become more favorable for Walz during his 2nd term as governor. Democrats flipped the state Senate in Minnesota that gave them control of both chambers of the state legislature. Walz has helped Democrats check off some of the most progressive policies from their wish list. This is what Walz's record looks like. He turned into state law a statewide right for every woman to abortion. He also ended up legalizing recreational marijuana. He set paid medical and family leaves for all employees and expanded background checks for gun purchases. Walz used to be a hunter and he used to be supported by the National Rifle Association, the NRA. But he renounced the NRA after the mass shooting in Parkland, Florida. He said he was influenced by his daughter's plea to do something to curb gun violence. So what is Walz known for? Tim Walz received some national attention after passing his ambitious Democratic agenda. He also became the chairman of the Democratic Governors Association, and in the weeks leading up to Joe Biden's exit from the presidential race, he had to balance out the Democratic governors groups between the ones who favored Biden to continue at the ticket and the ones who didn't want him to run. But Walz did not become so popular as a cable news fixture or the subject of memes until very recently. During Trump's most recent visit to Minnesota, a state which was last carried by a Republican presidential candidate back in 1972, Tim Walz was asked to deliver some preemptive counterattacks. It is then that he came up with his catchphrase about Donald Trump and his running mate, J.D. Vance, saying that these guys are just weird. And right away, that sentence and that characterization of Trump and Vance became viral. It became a popular attack line for Democrats. It went on to become some sort of unofficial campaign slogan for the Democratic ticket. In Republican circles, though, Tim Walz is associated infamously with the riots that erupted in Minneapolis after a police officer murdered George Floyd, an African American. Republicans have slammed Walz over his handling of the arson and the looting that followed. In fact, a 5-mile stretch around Minneapolis sustained heavy damage. A police station was also set on fire. The governor had deployed hundreds of National Guard troops 3 days after Floyd's murder, but his critics have argued that he was very slow to respond. In fact, Donald Trump has tried to take credit for quelling the violence in Minneapolis. Trump was the president when the George Floyd incident happened, and it spawned the Black Lives Matter movement. Trump famously said in his last rally in Minneapolis that he saved the city. He's been repeatedly saying that in his frequent trips to Minnesota. This is what he last said: "If you didn't have me as president, you would not have Minneapolis today." But the Walz pick by Kamala Harris is a victory for the party's left-wing donors who've waged a public campaign to elevate Walz as a contender. The case was probably best summarized in a memo called The Case for Governor Tim Walz to be Vice President, which was circulated amongst the most progressive donors in the Democratic Party. But Walz's pick is also going to perhaps upset plenty of Democratic donors, particularly those in the school choice, tech, and pro-Israel communities. Many of these major donors had deeper relationships with Governor Josh Shapiro of Pennsylvania, who was the other frontrunner whom Walz pipped to the second most top job. Progressive groups are also celebrating Harris's choice of Walz. A relative unknown from a reliably Democratic state, he was the clear choice for many on the left wing of the party. His nearest challenger was Governor Josh Shapiro of Pennsylvania. He was, of course, loathed for his reaction to the college protest that happened back in the spring against the war in Gaza, as well as his support for school vouchers. Walz is a moderate former congressman from a Trump-friendly district. He's seen as a candidate who can help Kamala Harris outside major urban pockets, although he's now taken on much more progressive positions while as governor in his second term. He has a connect with rural white Americans who Harris, as a San Francisco liberal, might struggle to connect to. Progressives have also argued that Walz is a unity pick, as opposed to rivals like Josh Shapiro of Pennsylvania, who drew opposition because of his stand on the war in Gaza, or even Senator Mark Kelly of Arizona, who was the other person who was in contention for this job. He was unpopular with many labor groups and teachers groups. But whether or not a white man in his 60s from rural America can balance out the ticket and give the Democrats 4 more years in the White House, that is what will be decided in November.